It is finished were Jesus' last words on the cross. But boy, did it take a long while to get there, didn't it? To finish. 12 hours. 12 hours of extraordinary pain. We gather around the cross. And we see in Mark's Gospel in chapter 15, as Jeannie read it to us, that it's divided into 4 3-hour chunks in the day. It starts very early in the morning when the chief priests with the elders and teachers of the law and the whole Sanhedrin made their plans. At 6 a.m. they gather together to decide to destroy Jesus. It's time to say goodbye. I wonder how Jesus felt after being betrayed by Judas, arrested by the religious leaders, soldiers, and taken into prison. In that prison all evening, in the darkness, thinking, his mind distracted by voices that he didn't want to hear, thinking through the night, God, I prayed to you in the Garden of Gethsemane, and all I got back was silence. I did so much for you, and I know it doesn't work like that with bargaining chips, but when I prayed, where were you? Judas, one of the 12, who I chose after I prayed, and you betrayed me. Wonder how many coins you got for me, Judas. And I washed your feet, and I taught you, and we shared bread, and we shared wine, and then you all ran, every last one of you. Even Mark, the young one, the hopeful one, had his clothes ripped from his body and ran naked from the garden in fear, and I was left alone. It's time to say goodbye. Jesus has all these thoughts running, I imagine, through his brain until at 6 a.m. he's told, come on, up, let's get going. We've got a trial, a show to put on. And people come forward one after the other, and they can't come up with something that is true about him. I read an article about the last hanging in the UK, and it took from going from the prison cell to having the noose hung around your neck 6 seconds. Just 6 seconds. Before that, you were given a little glass of whiskey. Gents, can you please go out? Excuse me, can you please go out if you're going to distract? Six seconds. And then you were gone. For Jesus, it's 3 hours. From 6 a.m. when he's accused to 9 a.m. when they crucify him on the cross. They would have taken his clothes off, stretched him out on the cross. Often one of your shoulders at least was dislocated to fit you into the holes for the nails. You lost control of all your bodily movements. And he was hung there. Time to say goodbye. And at noon, the 6th hour, darkness came over the whole earth. Was it literal complete darkness, or were the clouds so heavy and the hearts so dark that it felt like complete darkness? We don't know. But I think poetically it's like the end of a show when you go to the theatre and the curtain comes down and the lights go dark and it is finished. 3 hours of darkness, 180 minutes, 10,800 seconds of darkness. And then at noon, at 3 in the afternoon rather, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, my God, why have you forsaken me? With a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And he died. Time to say goodbye. In Romans chapter 14, verse 9, Paul writes to the early church, Christ died and returned to life so that he might be the Lord of both the living and the dead. An American preacher, Fred Craddock, said, I would like to extend that Bible verse so that it says Jesus is the Lord of both the living and the dead and the dying. Dead and living are two black and white marks. Those who are dying, it can sometimes be hard to say goodbye to. We don't know the right words when somebody is nearing the end of their life. Have you ever been walking along with somebody and you're chatting to them and you think they're going down that road and you say goodbye, but they don't go down that road, they keep walking with you and you think, oh, I've ruined that goodbye now, I've kind of blown it. I'm glad I didn't hug them or shake their hand because that would have made it even more awkward, but now I've kind of brought the conversation to a close and I've got to get it up and running again. And we just keep talking. Maybe they didn't catch my goodbye so clearly. We're not very good at goodbyes, are we, as a culture? Whether it's at the end of life or in normal life. I've got a friend who was a minister with me in Sevenoaks. We did loads together, played Monday night football together. We came to a ministers' cluster on a Thursday together. We had Easter, Good Friday together as families every year for years. He went and did another job outside of ministry, had a complete nervous breakdown. I remember going to see him one evening and he'd lost weight, he wasn't eating, he wasn't sleeping, he looked gaunt, his skin looked yellow, all life had gone. He barely looked at me. There was no energy there at all. And I said to him, Jeff, we pretend that's his name, Jeff, I love you. And then I left. And every time I phoned him, I finished. I don't know why, but I just felt, I love you. It's not a manly thing to say in the upbringing that I've got, but I felt I should keep saying it. He got mentally back better and in the place he felt he could be, and he applied for a job at another church, miles and miles and miles away. He said, would you come and preach at my induction? I said, I'd be honoured to. And then when they were leaving, he came round with his kids and his wife to see me. His kids were big teenagers by this stage. And we had a cup of tea, and he said, goodbye. I said, goodbye. And he went off, and I got on thinking, well, that's a chunk of my life that's gone. That's a friendship that will have altered by the geography that is between us. About 5 minutes later, he came running back into the house, bawling his eyes out. And he said, I didn't say goodbye properly. You told me you loved me. You know, I was in a complete place of mess. I had nothing to offer. And you told me you loved me, and I want to say goodbye properly. And just grabbed me and wept. I thought, all right, chill out. But at the same time, I thought, that's a goodbye. That's a goodbye. It was time to say goodbye. And sometimes when it comes time for us to say goodbye, we mess it up, don't we? We're not very good at it. When we sit with someone and we know they're dying, the words stumble out of our mouths rather than being a poem by Milton. You could argue that Jesus was terminally ill for the 3 years of his ministry. That as soon as he stood up with a new way of love for God, the religious leaders were against him. And that his health, although not visibly, was deteriorating. And it was a slow, long illness. If we're not comfortable with that, surely we can agree that the last 12 hours of his life were a terminal illness, as he hung there knowing he would die. Jesus understands that we're not very good at saying goodbye when the time comes, that we struggle when old age deteriorates, when unwanted health warnings come. Jesus understands. It was time to say goodbye on the cross as Jesus hung there. And the ladies who loved him and looked after him in his ministry stood at a distance weeping. Not the best way to say goodbye when the time comes. Judas, he's not said goodbye, and he's not going to. The alarm bells are probably ringing for Judas like a mobile phone, going on and on and on as he thinks, why didn't I say goodbye to Jesus properly? Why did I betray him? It's time to say goodbye for the disciples, but they're huddled in little holy groups in Jerusalem, hiding in fear. They're not saying goodbye. The religious leaders, they say goodbye with sharp words and evil tongues. The robbers either side of him say goodbye with swear words and horrible statements until one of them says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. A last throw of the dice to see if he can get into eternity. And Jesus says, today you will be with me in paradise. And Mary, his mother, at the foot of the cross with John, the disciple he loves. And they can't say goodbye. They just stand and stare until Jesus says, John, this is your mother. Mother, this is your son. And he's saying goodbye, because I am going and I won't be coming back today. It's time to say goodbye. It's not done very well around the cross. In the same way that for many of us, it's not done very well at big moments in life, but also at the end. And Jesus gets it, and Jesus understands. Sometimes I think the best way to say goodbye is to sit in silence with the one we love. As we sat around my dad's bed 4 Easter Sunday mornings ago, and my mum rubbed his eyebrow that my sister had chopped off when cutting his hair many years ago and had never grown fully back, and we always mocked him about that. He looked slightly surprised. Just a rub of the eyebrow said more than any words could. And after the silence, words came. But sometimes we start there, in silence, when we say goodbye.